So Section 4 is going to be all about the California Gold Rush and how that really changed our economy, changed the state of California, and made us a true nation that went from coast to coast. So many Americans traveled along the California Trail, but few actually went into California and settled there and built cities and built towns. Okay, most people just kind of traveled through. Many merchants went there to trade. There was a lot of trade between American merchants and Mexican merchants, and they would meet in California, but no one really lived there and stayed there for a prolonged period of time, at least not many. California controlled by Mexico before, or California was controlled by Mexico before the Mexican-American War, and especially after the results of the Texas independence, Mexico was kind of leery of letting Americans in. They didn't want as many Americans in because they thought something similar might happen, such as an uprising or California wanting to become independent. So the population of Mexico was mostly made up of Mexican citizens and Native Americans who had previously lived in California. In 1839, Mexican officials gave a Swiss immigrant John Sutter permission to set up a colony, and that's going to be important because you'll see Sutter's role here in a little bit and the discovery of gold in California. One famous group that tried to make it to California is called the Donner Party, and they're famous for their failure. Unfortunately, in 1846 they tried to travel to California. They got to the Sierra Nevada mountains and they tried to take a shortcut. Unfortunately, that shortcut left them stranded. Uh, they got lost in the winter. They were held up for months all throughout the winter. Some of the survivors reported that there were snowdrifts over 60 foot tall. So there's just no way that they could escape. And unfortunately, over half of their group was lost to starvation. So gold in California. Gold was discovered eventually at John Sutter's mill along the American River, okay, in January 1848. Okay, and John Sutter and his assistant that found it actually wanted to keep it a secret. Okay, they wanted to try to get as much gold as they could for themselves and make as much money before anyone else found out, because they knew if anyone found out that everyone would come to California. And we're going to see what happens once the word gets out. So eventually word does get out. Someone else discovered gold and spread the word, and eventually 80,000 people would move to California by 1849. Okay, these people who came in 1849 were called 49ers. For any football fans out there, you now understand why the San Francisco 49ers are called that. It goes back to the gold rush and the people who migrated to California for the gold rush. Most Midwesterners came via wagon train. Easterners and foreigners would sometimes come by a sea route. Um, like we said, sea travel is actually faster than overland travel at this time. So people from the East Coast would take a boat and basically have to go all the way around the continent, around South America to get to California, but that's the way that they went. Some used wagon trains, and there was actually a good deal of foreigners coming in too. We'll talk about them a little bit later. They arrived in San Francisco. Okay, San Francisco overnight went from a sleepy town of about 800 people to over 25,000 people. So big boost to the city of San Francisco. That's still to this day a large city in the United States. So boom towns. These were a community of experiencing sudden growth in business or in population. There were a lot of boom towns in California. San Francisco is one of them. Okay, they're just small little towns, and all of a sudden the gold attracts everyone, and there's this large population growth almost overnight. Okay, some of these boom towns had fun names like Poker Flats and You Bet, kind of all alluding to the money that they planned on making. Okay, so few of these people that came had mining experience. All right, people just got word that there was a get rich quick scheme, and things haven't changed. Anytime you hear about a get rich quick scheme, people are going to go for it, even if they don't really know what they're doing. And this was the same. A lot of people didn't know a thing about mining. They had no experience whatsoever, but they said, well, go and just try it. Okay, and the work was actually really time consuming and really difficult and actually really dangerous too, if you know anything about mining. They would prospect or search for gold along the banks of streams or in surface mines. The stream banking was a little easier, a little more novice friendly, or if you're inexperienced, a little friendlier. You would, take your pan and dip it into the water and kind of sift the rocks out and try to find the gold nuggets. That was a little safer and a little easier for those that weren't experienced. Um, and there were a lot of surface mines as well. Okay, placer mines used pans to wash gold nuggets out of loose rocks and gravel. That's kind of what I was talking about. You would be found around a stream, and you'd have this little pan. You'd get a load of rocks in it and some water, and you'd slush it around and look for the gold and try to place it out. Okay, in 1853, all right, California produced $60 million. Sorry about that interruption. You can blame Mrs. Klinkenbeard for that. But in 1853, $60 million in gold was produced in California, or found in California. That might not seem like much today, but keep in mind that the entire Louisiana purchase, just a couple years earlier, had been purchased for $15 million. Okay, so $60 million today, or $60 million then, would be the equivalent of billions of dollars today. So that was a lot of gold was being found, and a lot of rich individuals were being made. Okay, but most miners actually did not become rich. The amount of people that became rich versus the amount of people that came to California, there's a big discrepancy. 80,000 people, traveled to California to try to find gold, and maybe only a couple hundred really became really rich. Okay, so a lot of, there were some success stories, but a lot of failures and a lot of people who went out there and didn't make a whole lot of money. Okay, life in the mining camps. All right, mining camps sprung up wherever there was enough people to gather, look for gold. You would see that there would be an area that was completely uninhabited, and all of a sudden one person starts looking for gold, and someone else gets the idea that, hey, this might be a good spot too, and more people come around. Pretty soon you have a little community. Okay, miners came from many cultures and many backgrounds. Like we said, people came not only from the Midwest and the East Coast and the South, but from all over the world once word got around. Okay, most of the men were young, unmarried, in search of adventure, and kind of similar to what we were talking about the Mexican-American War, is that any opportunity to look for something adventurous, people would hop to it. So whether it be a war, the gold rush, anything to break away from the mundanities of normal life, and that was an opportunity for them to get away and try something new. So most of these men, there weren't too many that took their family along, but most of them were unmarried and just, said, why not? Why not take a shot? 80% of the settlers were Americans, or 80% of the miners were Americans. Okay, the rest came, like we said, from around the world. Only 5% of gold rush immigrants were from women and children. There was not a whole lot of women and children there. Like we said, most of these were unmarried men that came searching for gold. You typically didn't want to uproot your entire family to take them to California, although some did. The women that did live in California at this time usually made good money by cooking meals, washing clothes, and operating boarding houses. With that many men coming, especially unmarried men, they needed someone to do some of those chores that they weren't accustomed to at the time. Okay, so those women that did go actually made, quite a profit by taking over some of those duties of cooking and cleaning and operating the boarding houses. Miners paid high prices for basic necessities because of the large amount of gold in circulation. There's actually a severe case of inflation. What happens is those who are selling goods and selling, picks and axes and all the materials needed, and not only that, but food and clothing, they knew that there's a lot of money circulating around, so they're going to raise their prices. And there were a lot of people there, so there was a lot of demand. And if you know anything about basic economics, where there's a high level of demand, prices are going to be high, and that's what they experience. Okay, so for example, bread on the East Coast might be 5 cents, okay, maybe a loaf of bread. But in California, it would be 50 cents, and that wasn't uncommon to see prices that were 10 times higher. All right, so those people who went to California in search for gold and weren't successful, not only were they not successful in making money, they paid a very high price for the basics, such as food and clothing and shelter, and also the supplies to mining. So those who weren't successful, it really turned out to be an economic disaster for them. Those who were successful, they still paid a high price for stuff. So let's talk a little bit about some of the immigrants that came into California during this time. Okay, the lure of gold attracted people from around the world. Once word got around to Europe and to Asia, there were opportunists there too who said, why not? A new land, new opportunity, and the possibility of becoming rich. So many Chinese actually came from Asia, from China, hoping to make their wealth. About 24,000 in that 4-year range from 49 to 53 came over from China to America to search for gold. Many Chinese were not welcomed. They were not welcomed very well by the Americans. Okay, there was a lot of prejudice, a lot of racism. The Chinese were still able to Some of them mine, and some of them find other jobs, but they were not very well liked by most Americans. 1853, California placed a high monthly tax on foreign miners, and it's basically an exclusionary practice, trying to get them out, trying to get them out of the country because they did not want them there, trying to take their gold, or what they viewed as being their gold. Chinese workers were also the target of violence. Okay, um, even if they found gold, there wasn't a guarantee that they wouldn't be attacked and have it taken from them. So this is really kind of dangerous for foreign workers at this time. The legal system also favored Americans over immigrants. If there was a court case, if an American was accused of attacking someone from China, the Chinese citizen probably would not win that case. They would favor the Americans heavily. So there was a lot of discrimination, a lot of prejudice against foreigners, and in particular, anyone from Asia. Okay, in 1849 alone, 20,000 immigrants arrived in California from China, Europe, Mexico, and South America. So like we said, the majority of these miners are Americans, but there are a good chunk coming from foreign countries, trying to make their fortune as well. Okay, the most famous one was a guy named Levi Strauss, and right away, just hearing that name, you probably know what he's famous for. Okay, but Levi Strauss was a Jewish immigrant who made his money selling really tough denim pants for the miners. Like we said, mining was really tough work, really labor intensive. You're down on the ground, you're down in the dirt and in the rocks. You needed clothing that wouldn't tear apart. Okay, and Levi Strauss was famous for making these denim pants that really held up to the wear and tear of mining. And he's famous for the rivets. If you ever look at a pair of jeans, and if you look at the corner areas of the pockets typically, there's a little rivet there, a little metal rivet, and that was Levi Strauss's invention, and those made the pants last much longer. So he made his fortune not so much by mining, but by innovation and changing the apparel that the miners would wear, and he made a lot of money that way. Obviously, his company stands to this day. So on our final slide, let's look at the lasting impact of the gold rush on California's population and economy. First of all, didn't want all those to come up at once, oh well. But first of all, we saw a big population boom in California, obviously. Within just 2 years after the gold rush started, California was eligible for statehood. So by 1850, they became the 31st state. To become a state, you had to meet a certain criteria in terms of population. That's why if you look on the map that's up in the classroom, you'll see that the Minnesota Territory and the Oregon Territory and the unorganized territories in the middle of the state, they're not yet states because they don't have a large enough population. Okay, California in 2 years went from just a few thousand Americans to over 80,000, and probably is upwards of 100,000, and that made them eligible for statehood. The growth had a negative effect on Californios, the Native Americans, the people that were native to California before Americans came. Their lifestyle would drastically change. I mean, just imagine, if overnight Fort Wayne went from a population of roughly around 500,000 to 20 million. Okay, our lifestyle would change quite a bit. Our culture would change quite a bit, and that's what they experienced in California, those natives that lived there. In terms of economic growth, really helped California's economy, obviously. New business and industries transformed California. Not only the gold rush, but all the business that came with the gold rush, and all those who started up shops and started up markets and started up, the clothing stores, all the business that came with the mining really transformed their economy overnight, very, very quickly, faster than you would typically see an economy grow. Gold mining was obviously really important to the early economy, but over time, people found that California was very fertile land, and it was very useful for farming and for ranching, and many people who maybe didn't have success in the gold rush found other ways to make money and added to California's economy. The biggest problem at the time was that California was so isolated from the rest of the country. Okay, there was no way to connect them to the East Coast and to the Midwest. People kind of bypassed a lot of the states in the middle of the country to go all the way to California. Well, there was no infrastructure to get people quickly to California, so for a long time they were really isolated, and that ended eventually in 1869 with a transcontinental railroad that could take people from the Midwest to California and really connected California with the rest of the country and help them to grow and to expand into the large state and populous state that they are today. So that's all we have for the gold rush. If you have any questions about this PowerPoint, make sure to ask me or Mrs. Abbott. Thanks.